in canoes this afternoon. It's great, isn't it? They're in Colomendy and they're having an afternoon there, and then they're going camping tonight. And Aaron and Jill and Pam and Lenora are doing a barbecue for them tonight, and they're having a fire and campfire, and they're going to have a really good time. And then they're camping out. And some of the children have never been to anything like this, especially the smaller ones. So it's going to be really exciting for them. They're going to have a good time, aren't they? And it's going to be great. And it's nice and quiet here, isn't it? It's great. So, feel free to sleep and take this opportunity to nod off, because they'll be back next week. And remember to pray for Jill Walker as well today. Ed says she's not here because she had a cataract operation yesterday, and it's really painful for her. So we can pray for her to get her sight back as soon as possible, because Jill loves to read. And in fact, I've got a book for her here now, but there's no point in giving it to her. So unless you read it to her, Ed, you could do that, couldn't you? But we're still here with Song of Songs, and actually, because of the time today, I may only get one word in. So I've asked God if He'll allow me to teach it in the millennium, and then maybe I'll finish it by then. But we're on to 11, chapter 2, verse 11, and there's so much in this song. It's inspiring me to study and to learn more and to seek God more. I don't know whether it does for you, but it is for me. It's getting me to look more deeply into God's love and to look at what He's trying to say to us through this piece of what some describe as poetry or a love story. But they're right in both aspects, because it is a love story. It is poetry. It is something that is of a relationship between God and man, whether it's between Yeshua and the bride, or God and the wife of God, Israel. It's a love story anyway. And this part of the story here, it's probably the most well-known verse of all. It says, "The winter is gone and the rain has passed." It's over. It's finished. The difficult times have finished, and the rains are past and gone. That's what God is saying in this verse. And for those of you who've not been with me along this path, because some of you are new here, Steve's neighbor won't have a clue what I'm talking about, but we're looking at the Song of Songs and this love story between God and the soul of man. And we're here at this place where many people quote when you say the Song of Songs. They say this: the winter is over. How many of you recognize that verse more than any other verse out of it? It is, and it's because it's so meaningful, isn't it? It's so deep and meaningful to us. It speaks of hope. It speaks of an end of difficult times. It speaks of a new time, a summer period with God, and it's a change in season. It's a move from one season to another. And if we look at it in terms of the beloved, the maiden, she's been looking for her beloved, and she sees him coming down the mountain towards her. And then when we get to this verse, in verse 11, it's clear that what her beloved says to her is not what she expects, because he says, "Now," or in some translations, "See, the winter is over." How many of you got "now" in your Bibles? And how many of you got "see"? What have you got, Ed? For lo. It's an announcement, isn't it? Yeah. It's for lo. The season is changing. He says, "Now," or "see, it's over." It's an announcement to her. Why does he announce it to her? Because she's not expecting something as dramatic as the change of a season. I'm sure from the verses that we've looked at, she's expecting him to hold her and to nourish her and to give her refuge. And as Shirley's speaking on Psalm 91, to give her a covering. That's what she's expecting. But this is a massive change. It's more than that. It's a complete change. And he is announcing something to her soul. Now, there's two aspects to this verse and this part of the verse, and clearly it's to do with the bride and as well as the individual believer. You know, the woman that is described in the 10 virgins. It's also to do with Israel. It's a massive part of this verse actually is very relevant to Israel. But I'm going to leave that until next time I speak. I don't know, am I speaking next week or the week after or whenever? But when I speak about Israel, I want the children to help me to teach, because they have been learning a bit about prophecy, and they've been learning how important the prophets are. And I've been teaching them how very important the prophets are with regard to this verse and the nation of Israel. So they're going to come in and teach. Now they're in the camp, aren't they? So they can't do it this week. So I'm going to just stay with this aspect of the individual soul, because that's very deep anyway. And it's an aspect of this song that, you know, we all really need to dwell upon, because all of us have experienced a winter of some nature or some part. And the winter, if we look at the word winter, it's in Strong's 2638. It's that verse. And the Hebrew word for that is sitva. In the old Hebrew language, it's S-I-T-V-A, but in modern Hebrew, it's S-I-T-H-V-A. And what it means is that it's a season of darkness or a season of hiding. Winter is darkness or hiding. And we can all relate to that, can't we? Because some of you have this winter sad thing, don't you? This where you hate winter. How many of you have that? Shirley does. Yeah. Duque. Yeah. Shirley does. Anybody else? Where you really... Margaret, there you go. Right, there's quite a few people actually, and it is a condition that people have, because the days go shorter, don't they? It's cold, it's miserable, and I think one of the aspects of it, we're less sociable in the winter because we want to stay in, don't we? We want to put the electric blanket on and go to bed, and Chills does that. How many of you got an electric blanket? Yeah, all the sad people have got one. Annette, you've got one. Yeah, you've got one as well. Yeah, that's it. You know, that's a lack of trust that your husband will keep you warm. It's a reliance on modern technology. But it's this period that is very, very difficult. It's a period of dormancy as well, isn't it? It's a period where things die down, they die off, they die back, they go into the ground. So if you look at bulbs, they're hidden. There's nothing happening. On the surface, it looks as if there's nothing happening. It's not a time of growing. If you look at the trees, they've lost their leaves. It's cold. And then you get these long, dark nights, don't you, where, you know, there's nothing to look out upon. There's no vision of God's glory often in the winter. And God, in terms of spiritual things, it's like as if God is hiding from us during our winter period. And one of the things that we see when something dies back, when something dies, then there is a feeling of loss. And I think maybe that's how we feel in a winter period. We've lost something. We've not been able to take hold of the beauty of God's creation, and we lose those aspects. I mean, look at today; it's wonderful, isn't it? And what's evident about today and relevant for today is that this verse is relevant to the time that we're in with regard to the stars in the sky, because it's the summer solstice. I nearly said winter solstice, but it's the summer solstice, isn't it? 10,000 people at Stonehenge last night. A lot of people. and they're looking at the sun, and that's what's happened historically is people have looked to the sun to see the change of season. Now, meteorologists say that the summer started 3 weeks ago, but actually most people would say that summer starts today. And this is the first day of summer because it's the second day of sunshine we've had in months, isn't it? We've had loads of rain, and but man has always looked to the stars and the moon. And why is that? It's because within man, within the soul of man, there's a deep spiritual desire for God. We're distracted by the gods we create often, because we create every other god except God, and the real God creates us, doesn't he? That is the story. But the man is desperate to seek God in some form, and that's what people have done at Stonehenge for 2,500 years before Yeshua, before Christ. They've sought to seek some spirituality through the summer solstice, through the sun and the aspects of the sun. That's why when we look at the Christmas period on the winter solstice on the 21st of December, which is the shortest day, then we can see that people are seeking a spiritual experience because that is the birthday of Mithras, who is the sun god. So it's all connected in that way, and that's where we get Christmas from, isn't it? That's that aspect of things. It's a wrong spirituality. And if we look at what is happening in Stonehenge today, we see that people are connecting the sun, the longest day, because it's 16 hours and 34 minutes is the longest day of the year, for this year anyway. And this year in Stonehenge, they've had something called a yogathon, because yoga is connected to sun worship. Now, I know a lot of churches have yoga classes in them, don't they, and things like that. And people say, oh, it's not, it's to do with fitness and to do with health. But actually, it's directly connected to sun worship. That's the truth of it. And in Stonehenge, they've kind of shown us that that's what most people think, non-believers. And they have this yogathon. In fact, they've had the biggest yogathon in New York this year at the summer solstice. So it is connected to sun worship. And our calendar, the one that God put in place in Genesis 1:14, is connected to the moon. And it's a lunar calendar. And actually, if people really want to seek God, they should look at the lunar calendar that God put in place in Leviticus 23. I don't know if anybody has read Leviticus 23, but it actually tells you that God put in when he put the stars in the sky. Do you know what I'm going to say? I'm repeating things, aren't I, all the time? But when he did that, when he put the stars there, it was so we'll know his calendar, and that's the calendar we follow, and it's lovely, it's beautiful, and actually that calendar speaks of the winter passing, because we have in our calendar, godly calendar, all the feasts. They come in from spring to the end of autumn. It's that summer period. And you know what Yeshua says about the summer. You know, when you look for us spiritually today, when you look at what's happening in Israel, people going back, then he says summer is near. Look at the fig tree, he says, which is a symbol of Israel. But how does this affect us spiritually? Well, how do we look forward at the summer if we've not been through the winter? You know, one of the things that I've learned looking at the song is looking at 1 Corinthians 13, when Paul talks about love. He says, if you haven't got love, then you've got nothing really. You know, you can have whatever gifts you've got and you can exercise them. You can be a wonderful musician. You can be a fantastic orator. You can be so great technically. You can do all that. But if you haven't got love, you're worthless. And you know, the funny thing about winter is winter begins when love ends. So when you hear Yeshua talking about love, and he says, the Pharisees say to him, what are the two greatest commandments? And he says, love God and love your neighbor. They both have love. And he says the law hangs on love, loving God and loving your neighbor, the whole of the law, because it does. The Torah is about love, isn't it? Leaving things for the poor, giving to the poor, releasing the poor, all those things. And if you haven't got that, then winter of the soul begins. It does. How many of you have been in a place where you kind of are so angry with things around you, so angry in life, you don't care about anybody else? Anger actually brings that into fruition, doesn't it? A lack of desire to help others. When you get angry and you get cross, you'll lose the perspective on other people's lives, completely lose it. And you start to get cross, you start to get angry, you start to get miserable, and you lose the idea that other people around you are created by God and are a blessing. Are you pulling a face at me now? Yeah. Yeah. I knew she would. Yeah? Good, because you get angry sometimes, don't you? Oh, right. Oh, it's me, is it? I get angry. Okay. See, you do though. When you're cross and angry, you lose the perspective. What makes you cross? It's like a winter, isn't it? It's like everything, anger in your life. When you get angry, everything is dark, isn't it? There's no light. You know what I'm talking about? Yes. You do? Good, because we all get angry or have been getting angry or do get angry sometimes. And you can't see outside that black bubble, which is like winter. You don't want to do anything. You just want to take your anger out on somebody. And it's really difficult to see God in a situation when you're angry. Or when you feel lost. If we lose somebody, winter begins. And God knows that. And Yeshua knew it. When we lose somebody in terms of family who've died, or we've lost somebody very, very close to us, then winter begins for us. And God knows that aspect of mourning, because Yeshua says in Matthew 5, doesn't he? He says, blessed are those who mourn. They'll be comforted. God is saying, I know you're going into a winter period, but that's okay, because I'm not going to leave you or forsake you. I'm not going to abandon you in that place of winter. Because although it's a very dark place, winter is dark, although it's very, very dark, and it's a hidden place sometimes, God is light, and he comes and he brings light. It's like when we have our salvation, when we enter into salvation, often that comes in a very winter season in our lives, doesn't it? It did for me. It came in a winter season, because it was very clear to me, looking back, that I was in a very dark place when I came to the Lord. I'd been divorced. I was living on my own. I kind of thought I'd got it together. And then I met Ada, and she said, "You've got nothing together, mate. You're a mess." She pointed out that I was in the winter, really. And then you find your salvation, and suddenly there's hope. You then see, you have some hope. And the maiden here, she's seeing her beloved coming down the mountain. She's got hope, but she's not sure what she's got hope in. She's not. And her soul is longing for God, longing for the presence of her beloved. And then he announces this thing, whoa, the winter's over now. It's like, how many of you remember salvation like that? Where for me, the biggest thing is shame has gone. The shame of all that I'd done had gone. How many of you felt that? With winter, the branches of the trees in winter are branches of shame, aren't they? And God takes away that shame, doesn't he? He removes that just by coming and bringing love and comfort and just bringing a peace that we don't have in life without the Lord. And this moment of passing from season to this wonderful season of summer is something that God wants us to understand is a process of a spiritual process. Now, I want to touch on something because I think it's very important for us to understand as believers, and looking at what Paul said and what the disciples said and what Yeshua said, is actually the passing of winter to summer in terms of our spiritual self, our soul self, is actually a place of moving from life into what the world would say is death, but actually is a moving into the place of everlasting life. It's that complete change of season for the soul of man. That we, although we're kind of frightened of that aspect of dying in the flesh, actually we should be excited at this new life that God is giving us, this new season that God gives us through salvation, through knowing Him, knowing who He is, repenting of our sin, and moving into that place of a new beginning with Him in the spiritual realm. It's a transference of the soul from the winter to the summer in the heavenly realm. I mean, that is a beautiful picture, really, of the manifestation of the beloved saying to the maiden, the winter is now over. You know, that time of moving spiritually into the heavenly spiritual realm where we will be in the arms of our Savior forever. Isn't that what we actually look forward to? Isn't that what makes life on earth something that we should see as a winter, but see as something as part of the winter in life, if you like, in the whole aspect of spiritual life, in which we can give hope and give nourishment and care and provision to others who are also experiencing winter. Because in winter, nothing grows. Well, some things grow, but not an awful lot. The only thing I grow in winter is celeriac, and Charles gets that fed up of it. And I try and give it away, but some people think it's a football or something, and they leave it in the garden. But that's the only thing really we harvest, or purple sprouting broccoli. And as Sam said, if you give me another piece of purple sprouting broccoli, Dad, I'm going to leave home. And he has. He's gone to university. But they're the only things that grow. So there's no growth in the spiritual realm. Seems in a winter period of the spirit realm. There's very, very little growth. And therefore, there are those of us who, like you and me, who have found the blessing of Yeshua, found our salvation. We are the provision of a spiritual food. God uses us as a provision of a spiritual food for those who are in a winter place. Shirley is ministering to somebody at the moment who is really in a bad, she's in hospital, and we don't know how long she's got to live, but Shirley's going to see her and speaking in terms of spiritual terms to this lady who doesn't know God. But Shirley's providing a spiritual nourishment for her, and I know that there will be fruit from that. And certainly there's a peace in that for her, in having Shirley pray for her, even though she doesn't believe. And that's, God really needs us to be a provision for those sort of people. And we can do that in many ways, can't we? Provide nourishment for people who are in a winter place, who are in that place of darkness. We can bring light, can't we? Bring a smile. The difficulty is with many of us is that we really haven't moved out of the place of winter into summer spiritually. So when we go and see people, they don't see any change in us. They don't see the love of God shining through us because we're still in that bad place. We haven't actually accepted that the love of God has removed our sins. He's taken the things that have burdened us. He's lifted those from us, and we've got the hope of everlasting life. If we had that, then when we meet with those who are in the winter, when we meet with those who are cold and spiritually and really struggling with life, we're not able to convey the love of God that brings summer into their life. And I think if we did that as Christians in the church, things would change. There would be massive change in our society because the church looks like winter. It looks like the rains are still there. The rains haven't passed and gone. Just look at the buildings. Some of the buildings look so dark and so grey, surrounded by graves. What does that speak of? I always used to think growing up, and I've said this a few times, looking at the church, in my mind, I still remember churches being winter-type scenes, with gravestones. Do you feel the same? When actually the church should be a sign of light, a sign of the beauty of God. And it's not a building, really. It's people like you and I shining the sunshine of summer and giving of what we've got. God has given us provision in the wintertime because it is wintertime at the moment. He's given us provision in the wintertime so that we can take it to those who are actually living in the winter. The spiritual winter. That's what he's done. And I'm going to ask Shirley in a minute just to speak about how you have brought light and brought summer to so many people in other places. You see, we live in a bubble here in Wales and England. We do. It is a bubble. It's something that is... We're doing all right, aren't we, materially? We're okay. We're warm, aren't we? We've got a roof over our heads. We've got a building. We don't face persecution, do we? We don't face... Diana prayed that in the prayer room earlier on. We don't face all the problems, do we? Yeah, we get somebody having a go at us sometimes. But that's always been the case with people who keep Sabbath. Nothing changes there. And in fact, I've got something written by somebody in 1851 which talks about that there's always this issue with Sabbath. But actually, we don't face persecution, do we, in the way that many do? But I was reading this morning just about how in Nigeria, on the 21st of March this year, 140 Christians were slaughtered by Boko Haram. They were murdered. And that was roughly around the same time as the mosque was attacked in New Zealand. Now, I knew about the mosque in New Zealand because we had it on the news, and it was a terrible, terrible event. It was a disgraceful stain on mankind. But you know what? I didn't know about this thing in Nigeria on the 21st, but it's happening all the time. In Egypt, in Pakistan, there is mass persecution. And we don't read about that, do we? But our brothers and sisters are going through a winter. And I know that things are very difficult in Myanmar. And in India, we've been giving to India, haven't we, where you can't preach the gospel openly in some parts of India. But you've been giving as a congregation to India. In Israel, when people are living under the threat of constant war and they're affected by depression and anxiety and things, you've been giving there. There's a winter in our morals. If we look at abortion is on the rise in this country, but if you look at the abortion in Israel and other places, it's a winter in our morals. But you've been supporting Beth Haim and other places in Israel, pro-abortion work. We've here at Father's House, pro-life work, not pro-abortion. Yes, I'm glad you are here. Because that's being recorded, you can imagine, can't you? Pro-life we are. Yeah. So don't go, Shirls, because I'm going to ask you to do something now. So we're giving here to bring some summer, some warmth, some sunlight into people who are in the winter, in the dark. And I just want to ask Shirley now to come up. Helen, can you give her the microphone? Oh, you've got it. Right, thank you. Well, you didn't have a microphone last time when you spoke here last week. You couldn't find it, could you? No. So I'm going to ask Shirls to just share now a little bit about the work that you've done in Myanmar to bring a bit of summer into the winter that the children, the orphans in Myanmar, and the people in the district that we minister to experience. So, Shirls, can you do that?
Okay, we've got some photographs which we want to show you because some of you are not on the WhatsApp, and many times we get information through from Myanmar as to what has happened, and we all of us who are on WhatsApp and who get that are able to enjoy it and talk about it, but we realize that many of you don't, and it was about this time last year that we began to talk to you about the fact that we felt God was saying to go to Myanmar. We had been in contact for over a year with Pastor Kaul Lian Thang, and his wife Angoon. And they are just an ordinary couple of believers in a tiny town in the northern, central northern Myanmar. And they are Sabbath keepers. And they're just one of those small groups of people. They had a church at that time, I think, of about 25 people, and had been in touch with Michael asking about through the internet, through our website, asking questions, and Michael would answer the questions, and it's a constant thing. And we just began to feel that we should go, and we gathered together money last year, and we went in October. And really, it was a shock. Now, I know that when you go to India, it's a shock. When you go to Kenya, it's a shock. I've been to Kenya, and I was shocked at the state of the children there. But the disparity between what they have and what we have is like black and white. It's like far as east is from west. This is not just a group of Christians being persecuted. This is a group of Sabbath-keeping Christians being persecuted. So they're not just being persecuted by the Buddhist regime there and left out in the cold, but they're also persecuted by the Christian church who think they're off the rocker. We know what that feels like. So we made relationship with them, and we spent a week with them and had a very impactful time. And when we came back, we thought we want to be able to help them. And Kaul and Angoon run this orphanage. At the time, they had about 11 orphans, all of whom had been orphaned at really young ages. Little boys, little girls, parents died from TB. Or mental illness had meant that they were just left with nothing. There were some terrible stories, and we just felt that we would like to help, and so over the last 6 months we've been trying to put together a way of helping them. Will be practical. Well, when we left them back in October, we left the money that you had raised for us. We asked for £3,500. We went with nearly 6, which was amazing. And that covered all our flights and our hotel, and we had to pay for the food while we were there for them to come to the conference, such as it was. And we were able to give them money. We gave Pastor Kaul a gift. And we were able to give them money for the toilets. They didn't have toilets. And we had a 13-year-old little girl going to the toilet beside a 10-year-old boy. And we felt that wasn't right. And I said, what's this big block of bricks doing in front of the orphanage? He said, that's the first load of bricks which I bought with a gift to build a toilet. And so we gave them the remainder of the money to build the toilets, and they now have a bathroom where they can wash in private, and where they can have and 2 toilets, a boys and a girls. So we have given them that, and that has revolutionized their lives. And then we recently have asked if we could have help towards a teacher, because these orphans have nobody except the people who are helping in the church and Call and Angoon who look after them. And one lady who cooks for them and keeps house for them. So we thought if we could provide them with a teacher who could teach them English and increase their knowledge of English and maths and sciences, they would stand a better chance of being able to do something other than the poorest of the poor when they are older. And the Buddhist schooling system is not the best either, I gather. So we put out a request, and we now have £100 a month coming in to Father's House to be able to send to Myanmar, which pays for a teacher and a little bit over for food for the orphans. And then 2 weeks ago, we had a special call. On Shavuot, we asked everybody to come and stay for a meal after church, because we wanted to raise money for a particular reason. And that was that it's been so hot in Burma recently that the water has gone. And they were all having to go miles to collect water in gallon containers and bottles and things. They didn't have water anymore on site because they use a well. The wells had dried up. So they needed to drill down into the ground to get wells, to get water. So these pictures are of us cooking a meal, of the tribes because the tribes pray for the children, the orphanage children, and have raised money. You know that little Sarah has been making and selling cakes after church to make money. Should we put these through now? Oh, you are, thank you. Didn't see it. And so we had this lovely, it was a typical Myanmar meal, very simple, but we did it in aid of Myanmar. And everybody seemed to enjoy it. We ran out of food, to be fair. The kids didn't have very much to eat, but everybody who was there. And we asked people to give in order that they could have water, which, let's face it, how many of you don't have water? How many of us struggle with water, with hot water? So they began to dig, and we had an awful problem getting the money over to them. But I said to them, it will come, dig. And so they began to dig, and they put the pipes in, and we raised £800 on that Saturday night. Amen. Well, the problem is it costs £70 to send 700. So we sent £700 over, and that covered the cost of this work, which was about 500. And then I asked Call to pay for his visa, because Father's House has paid for him to come to Israel, to go to the Israel trip. It was something he wanted to do, and so various monies have come from different places, and he's going to go to Israel. I said, take your visa out of that, and then will you buy the children some food? More chicken. We've got a picture. I hoped we would have that one, but we haven't got it. Of these, they cook every so often. They have a treat, and it's a chicken which has got feathers and all, gullet and all, the whole lot. And then they do it like this. They spice it and fry it. And the children are just looking at it. And they're like this. And it's just a lovely photograph. But he bought them chicken, and with the money that was left over, he's bought them rice as well. 6 or 7 massive bags of rice, because that's just about what they eat with a few veg. So that's their orphanage. That's their furniture. They sit on that wooden platform there, and opposite there are 2 benches, but they don't have seats. They just sit on the floor, and so we wanted to let. Oh, and this is little Joshua. This is baby Joshua. When we went in October, Angoon was pregnant with Joshua. And they were hoping for a little girl, really, but God didn't have that planned at all. And they asked us to name him. So we felt the Lord gave us the name Joshua for him. So he's very close to us. He's very near to us. So I wanted to show you what your efforts, what you have given when we have asked for money, have resulted in. And it's such a blessing when we give to some charities, we don't know where the money goes, do we? When you give your money for Myanmar or for Israel or for the Philippines or for India, wherever it is we ask for, it goes there, and there's nothing on the way that stops it. So I just wanted to bless you with that. Thank you. Look at the one in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, H. So, thank you, Shirley. And another thing there as well, we were able to pray for people when we were there, and people who had been ill for most of their lives were healed. Amazing. And I don't know whether you remember, we prayed for Lal and Doon, who were desperate to have a young couple who were desperate to have a child, absolutely desperate. And then the month after we came back, they told us that that Doon was pregnant, and it was lovely. And then she lost the baby. Well, we've been praying since again, and now she's pregnant again. So Lal and Doon are their names. Please pray for them. And it was amazing, actually, that your gifts and your love and the things that you do have an effect on people who are in the winter in their lives in various places in the world, particularly this little community. And I think often when I look back of how much joy you brought to people in Kafr Aza and on the Gaza border, who, the money and your visits there, when we go there just to show love, it just brings something of summer in the winter. And one of the other things that we're able to do here is to pray for people when they're sick. And one of the issues that I find is a growing issue in society today is the fact that so many people are suffering from depression. And depression is so much connected to winter feelings. I don't know whether you've experienced depression. I kind of experienced anxiety. Shirley's experienced depression. But I'm not going to ask you to show me by raising your hands how many of you have had depression, but an awful lot of people have. And if we can pray and God can bring light into that, then people who have depression can find hope. They can find, and they can come from that place of winter into the place of summer, which God wants us to live, and God wants us to live in that season. But the depression and the things of the emotion are often darker and more hidden than things of the physical. If you're ill physically, or you break a leg or something, we can all see it. But how many of us know if somebody's suffering from depression? Or it's hidden. And that word "sitva," winter, in terms of the song in this particular verse, it only occurs in this place and in Isaiah once. means hidden or a dark place. And how many of us have been in this hidden dark place? And that's why it's so important that people find God and find hope and find salvation and find a release. And you know what? That doesn't mean that as Christians we don't suffer depression, because a lot of Christians do suffer from depression. But what it means is that we have a hope, don't we? We have something to hang on to, someone to talk to when we're in hiding. And most people who are in depression, my mother had it, she would go into hiding. And she didn't want to see anybody, you know. But that's understandable. She had 5 lads and 2 girls, and I can. But the soul, the deepest part of the soul, longs for God. In whatever situation we're in, we really long for God. Psalm 119:20 says, "My soul is consumed with longing for your ordinances at all times." Isaiah 26:9 says, "My soul yearns for you in the night. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you." You know, in the night, my soul yearns for you. There are people who actually are desperate during the nighttime. The nighttime is the worst place for them. It's a time when they can't sleep, when they're on their own. They're isolated. And the soul of man yearns for peace and for the presence of God. And sometimes we just can't find that presence. And I'm going to ask Margaret now. Is she there? I'm going to ask Margaret now to come out, and she's going to do a dance which speaks of actually moving from the place of hiding, from the place of darkness, into the presence of the beloved. It's the bride coming out of that place of a really dark place. And I know from my studies recently that the church, the body of the Messiah, to an extent, from the 3rd and 4th century on, has been in a really dark place. And we've been hiding the things of God from the world. And now I think that God is doing something. We can actually make a difference. And we have an opportunity to make a difference. So I just want to just give some hope and encouragement by asking Margaret to do the dance. Are we ready with the film and not the film, the music, guys? Okay, thank you. beautiful. Beautiful. God has gifted Margaret with such it's great to have a Jewish believer with such a gift here. It just brings. God loves dance, doesn't he? He loves expressions of worship, and it's beautiful. Now, I just want to finish off with something, and then I'm going to ask Shirley to sing a song that she wrote, and she'll explain to you why she wrote it. Yes. I pay you a lot of money to do this. Yeah. I've got a lot of scriptures here, but I'm just going to go back to this one in Psalm 119 because when we look at the Jewish perspective of winter, it's obviously the diaspora. It's them being in the nations, but actually they understand God's perspective of winter when his word is not being carried out, when his word is not being fulfilled. And this Psalm 119:20 says, "My soul is consumed with longing for your ordinances at all time." And when I look at history, I see that right throughout history, there have been people who have stood as light as summer in the winter of the nations with regard to the Sabbath and the feasts. That is the understanding of this psalm, that actually God is desperate that we will keep the ordinances that he put in the sky, so that this time when people are celebrating the summer solstice and are using yoga, and the church is following Sunday in accordance with the sun, and it's celebrating the god of Mithras at winter time. You know, what we're doing here is bringing sunshine, summertime. We're practicing summertime in the winter of the nations. Now, this week I've learned about a man called George Marsh, who was from Bolton in the 16th century, when there was historically a changeover during the Reformation period, when the Protestants were taking over from the Catholic Church, and there was a lot of murders, hatred, executions that took place. And George Marsh was brought to Chester Abbey, to the Abbey itself. And I don't know how many of you have been to Chester Cathedral and seen the Abbey gates there, but you can imagine that in the 16th century. And George was somebody who opposed the Catholic Church and its practices, the feasts and all the things that the Catholic Church had done. And he refused to conform to what the Catholic Church was enforcing at the time. And he was brought to the consistory court in Chester, where he was charged with heresy because he was speaking against the church. And he went on trial and was executed at the Abbey Gate, which is the church at that time. And then we move on in history to a time when there was a lot of executions under the Protestant communion in the 16th and 17th century of believers who kept Sabbath and kept the feasts, who refused to conform to the continuation of the enforcement by the church for Sunday and Christmas and Easter. And I've picked up some writings of a woman called Tamar Davis in 1851. And she says this in 1851. This is 200 years after the beginning of the persecution of the church, of the believers like us, Sabbatarians, if you like. She says, at the present time when the Sabbath controversy is engaging so much of the public attention, and when Sabbath conventions and Sabbath unions are being chronicled almost monthly, I consider it unnecessary to offer any apology for the introduction of the following work to the public notice. My reader need not fear a repetition of recapitulation of the arguments generally employed in favor of the sabbatical institution, as it refers either to the first day or the last day of the week. Neither will his attention be wearied by the prolific and verbose details. It has been my aim to collect and collate and condense facts as much as appeared consistently with these times. And she writes about people like us keeping Sabbath all over the world at that time in 1851, and the pressures and the persecutions by the Anglican Church at that time. Now, we are not facing winter in terms of persecution, are we? We're not in a winter. Actually, I feel like we're in a summer. We've found freedom. We've found life. We found purpose. We found that our Messiah is the Messiah of fulfillment in what we do. We found that actually our salvation is linked to what we do because we're able to show God we love him by the way that we practice our faith. 1 John 5 says, if you love God, you will obey his commands. What are his commands? These are his commands that we practice at Father's house. So we're showing God we love him. But I've got a growing sense that as we're not feeling as if we're in the winter, spiritually the nations are in a winter. They're in a winter period. But I've got a sense that God is saying that he's calling people together at this time to promote the fact that he wants to say to his bride, winter is over and the rains are past and gone. And he wants his bride to wake up and receive the announcement that he gave to the maiden that now winter is over. We have an opportunity in our time without the threat of persecution from government or from church to actually do the things that God's called us to do so that we can bring light into this dark church which is practicing things of darkness. Within the church today, there is so much going on that is allowing darkness to pervade even the souls of the believers. But the opportunity is changing. The season is changing. We're now free to practice how God asks us to practice our faith. And it should be a time of excitement, a time when we can actually move from that place of hiding, as the early believers did, to a place of openness and a place of light and life. And I think for believers all over the world, even though many are persecuted in some parts of the world, then this opportunity to keep the Lord's feasts and his Sabbath is a new opportunity in the church again. And a continuation of what's happened in the past, but without the hatred, without the persecution, and without the executions that took place 200 years ago. What a blessing it is for us in these times to do what we're doing. What an opportunity it is for us to tell the world who are worshiping the Son today, we need to be worshiping the Son of God. Winter is over. Now it begins for us, I believe, with all my heart, it begins for us with our own understanding of where our soul is with God. If our soul is experiencing a winter period, a time when we are struggling with our faith and struggling with the things of life around us, struggling maybe with illness, struggling with oppression, struggling with depression, struggling with all these things, I think it's an opportunity for us to say to God, would you please take us out of this place? Would you please move us from this place so we can experience this new season that you were bringing to us in our time for our generation. But it begins with a personal story so that we will have the strength in him and the capacity within him to take what we're doing today into the world and enable other people to experience the freedom of loving God and keeping his commands that he's asked us to do for centuries. So can we just spend a moment now just closing our eyes and asking God to take us from the winter moments into the place of freedom in summer, where there will be new growth, where there will be a time where we will see flowers appearing and the rains will have passed. Shirley, can you come? Shirley, do you want to say about the song? Do you want to talk about that? Shirley, before I met her, had been asked to write a song for somebody who was marrying, and she wasn't married. She'd never been married and was wanting a husband, someone like me. And actually, she wrote a list, and it's nothing like me at all. But one day I will be on that list. But she wrote this song for this couple who also, the girl who was a friend of hers, had also not been married. And Shirley was 37 when she wrote this song. And then shortly after, we met and we married in a short time. And it's been like summer for us, hasn't it? Ever since. But I just want us to, just before Shirley starts, I just want us to just spend that moment just to give God the winter aspects of our lives. Let's just ask him to take those and hear the words, now the winter's over.
that you'd kiss me with kisses from your mouth, sweet